So hey everyone, welcome back. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, and welcome to today's ContainerJournal.com program, brought to you by Techstrong and Fairwinds. My name is Cody, and I'm the host of Techstrong Learning, and we have an exciting panel ahead. First, I do need to cover just a couple of housekeeping notes. Today's session is being recorded, so if you miss any of our discussion, maybe you'd like to rewatch or share with a friend. The on-demand recording will be made available shortly after we conclude our live session today. If you have any questions, we want you to send those in to us using the Q&A tab on the right side of the screen. Over there, you'll also find the chat tab, and I'd like you to start warming up that chat tab for me. Let us know from where you are joining us today. If you navigate to the handouts panel, you'll see a downloadable version of our pulse meter report, which is the main topic of our conversation today. So feel free to grab that. And of course, before we close out, we are giving away 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So be sure to stick around for the duration of our program. So today we are talking about scaling Kubernetes without compromising security and operational excellence. I'm joined by Andy Suderman, CTO at Fairwinds, Joe Pelletier, Vice President of Product Strategy at Fairwinds, and our very own Mike Rothman, Chief Strategy Officer at Techstrong Group and GM of Techstrong Research. So Mike, Joe, and Andy, thank you all so much for being here with us. Mike, do you want to go ahead and put on your research hat?
I do. I can't take it off, Cody, right? I mean, I'm always doing research in one way, shape, or form. Welcome, everybody. We were just chatting. I'm here from Atlanta in Georgia. I know, Andy, where are you at? You're outside of Colorado, I believe? Or not?
Yeah, Divide, Colorado.
Divide, Colorado. Joe, you're coming to us from
Boston.
From Boston today. So we've got kind of, a little bit of everything, here in terms of geographic representation, at least within the States on that front. But we're not talking about geography here, right? We're here to talk about Kubernetes, which is, I think, a favorite topic of everybody. We recently worked with Fairwinds to build out a pulse meter. That is our 2 to 3 page infographic. We polled you folks, right? We polled our audience to get a sense of, what you're thinking and where and what you're worried about and key issues for Kubernetes this year. So we're going to go through all that data. We've got that. But I want to start, first of all, I guess you guys should introduce yourself. You're such frequent guests on our webinars. I feel like everybody should know who you are, but I guess I shouldn't assume that. So Andy, why don't you introduce yourself, a little bit, and then Joe, and then we'll kind of dive into it.
Sounds great. So, I got my start. I'd like to say I'm a reformed sysadmin. I used to manage physical servers in a rack somewhere and, do a lot of tmuxing and SSH into lots of different boxes and things like that. And learned the error of my ways and discovered Kubernetes. And I've been working in Kubernetes for about, I think 7 years now. So quite a while. I've been at Fairwinds for 4.5, everything from SRE to CTO now. And I'm also author and maintainer of several of our open source projects. So heavily involved in all things Kubernetes and open source.
And open source, that's great. Joe?
Yep. So my name's Joe. I've actually been in the kind of the cloud and application security and DevOps space for about 12 years now, and have been in doing product management for about 10. And so I joined Fairwinds about 4 years ago, and helped the team kind of launch a few of our newer products and open source projects, and so work closely with Andy on that and work with our customers. And so it's been a fun ride, and we're seeing Kubernetes obviously kind of grow very broadly now, and so it's kind of an exciting time for the cloud native space.
Yeah, no kidding. So and I'm Mike Rothman, so I head up Techstrong Research. I'm a 30+ year security professional, and starting to get my feet wet, and I've been doing DevOps for a while and DevSecOps, and the cloud native thing is interesting and a great learning opportunity. And they say you can't teach old dogs new tricks, but I'm going to try to change that line of thinking and dig into a lot of cloud native stuff. So it's been great, first couple of months here to really dig in and start to understand how things are going. For Predict, a couple of weeks ago, we put together a number of different trends in terms of what we thought was going to happen with cloud native and obviously Kubernetes. And, the general theme was the long march, right? And again, for those that have been doing technology for a while, things can get hot, they can get overheated. Everybody can say, oh my God, kind of it's happening and it's happening right now. And, jump on the bandwagon. And then, you start talking to some other folks and you realize that Jeffrey Moore was right. 25, 30 years ago when he came out with the, adoption curve, and you had the early adopters, and then, crossing the chasm and, into the early majority. And there's a way things kind of proceed in terms of technology markets. And I would expect we're going to see the same thing with Kubernetes, maybe faster because we do things, that way. But, I guess our first trend, because that's what I was talking about, is, no derailing Kubernetes, right? Kind of the fact is, and I think that's kind of justified or at least validated based upon, kind of our first data point here, right? How many production applications are operating in a Kubernetes environment? 15%, 1, 6%, 2, 15%, 3 to 5, right? 31%, kind of 6 or more, right? So Kubernetes is on fire. And if I can introduce Elmo meme into the discussion at any time, it's a win for me. So I'll take that one and pack up and go home. So no, I can't. But Andy, so again, you're kind of working with clients all day, right? CTO kind of setting the direction. Is this kind of the adoption that you're starting to see? I mean, what do you expect this chart to look like, if we're having this discussion, in 10 months or 12 months, a year from now?
Yeah, I think this is fairly representative of what we see. I mean, it's hard to reason too deeply about this just because, size of company is a huge factor in this. I think, small companies, 6 or more applications, they may not even have 6 or more applications. Depends on where they're at in their journey to, microservices and splitting things up. But I'd say this is probably about accurate. I definitely expect to see this increase over the next 12 months. I think, we've had so much hype for the last, like I said, I've been doing this for like 7 years. We've had so much hype during that time. And so the noise is incredible, but the actual adoption is hard and it's really difficult to do. And so it's a lot lower than we really think it is. And I think this graph represents that well.
Yeah. Joe?
Yeah, and I would say that it's not surprising to see sort of this bimodal distribution too, to some extent, right? You have a group of folks who are they're not yet running Kubernetes applications in Kubernetes, right? Or they're doing maybe only one application. And then there's another group that, is 6 or more, right? And I think there's definitely a trend where there's folks either they're testing out Kubernetes, trying to understand how do they operationalize this, right? To bring it into their environment, right? And then there's companies that have fully embraced it, right? And, I think that 6 or more could even be larger, right? I think it might even be hundreds potentially, depending on how many teams have actually onboarded. So it makes sense to me. I mean, this is consistent with what we've seen just from customer conversations. And I think over the next few years, it's going to be very important for the community and the tooling in the space to really enable more teams and more applications to scale up on Kubernetes, right? That is the ultimate goal. You want to help teams ship faster, and Kubernetes is becoming the kind of way to do that.
Yeah. So let's dig into that. I don't want to steal my thunder with all my fancy charts and I've got pie charts, I've got bar charts. There's something for everybody here if you're kind of a data person on that front. But I do want to dig into that a little bit because as I've been working, and again, it's more from a security standpoint in the past, right? But the last 10, 12 years, I've been doing cloud stuff, right? And it kind of takes a similar type of discussion, which is they play around with it, right? And then they deploy maybe 2 or 3 things, and then they deploy another 2 or 3 things. And then you talk to them and they go, what's your plan for next year? How many applications are you trying to migrate to the cloud? And they go, 200. Wait, hold on a second. You did a couple, right? Maybe you got a half a dozen, and now your goal for the next year is 200, right? I mean, so how do you operationalize that kind of thing? And I hear a lot of the same inclinations, right, from Kubernetes folks, and that they got a couple up there. 6 or more was kind of arbitrary in terms of the data that we asked. But you talk to these folks, and it's not just 10, right? It's 60 or 100 that they want to start to think about migrating. So what are some of the constraints, right? What are some of the things from a systematic or operationalizing perspective that you have to start thinking about if your senior management is going, we've got to hit the gas and we've got to figure out how to do this faster because it's going to help us save money. It's going to help us be more agile. All those businessy things that, kind of have driven adoption of microservices and therefore a lot of the cloud native capabilities.
Yeah, I mean, I'll kick that one off. I think I think organizations that are going to like 200 apps, right? Like it's one thing to be able to demonstrate, here's how you can get a container to run in Kube, right? Because like actually, that is becoming more and more of a known pattern, right? But the issue is that container configured correctly? Is it going to be able to kind of restart if there's been some sort of outage? Does it have the right memory and CPU profile so that you're consuming an appropriate amount of cloud resource? That there's security considerations, et cetera. So I think the organizations that are realizing, okay, in order to go to 200, we actually have to think about some baseline of consistency, and that consistency really becomes around how those workloads or how those applications are configured. And I think things like policy enforcement have become very popular over the past year or so, because organizations are realizing going from 1 to 100 requires a more prescriptive approach to consistency and best practices, and not just kind of making one-off environments for each team. Andy, I'm curious what you're seeing though.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. I mean, Kubernetes is complex. It's obscenely complex, right? And you take your cloud API, which is already complex, depending on where you're coming from. You layer another API on top of that, and now you have this world of options where the defaults are not great, right? Like the out-of-the-box defaults for Kubernetes are not great. The complexity is super high. So you have to remove some of that complexity away, whether that's creating another abstraction layer on top of it. Not a huge fan of that approach, but or creating guardrails with policy and quick feedback loops into your CI/CD that enable developers to get that information fast and not have to worry about all the complexity, but still have the security and efficiency and things like that built in when they're deploying. So
yeah, no, that's I'm really pleased to hear that, because when I was writing our trends for this year, I was kind of making up a bunch of stuff. No, I'm just joking. I mean, we have enough people on board where I wasn't actually making things up, but you throw a bunch of stuff against the wall and you see what kind of resonates, and you hear that. So the two pieces that we talked about in terms of kind of continuing to enable and foster an environment where you can adopt Kubernetes more specifically and faster, or about deploying faster, right? So that's really, kind of adopting, making setup and onboarding easier, kind of reducing the complexity. Andy, you were talking a lot about that. And then deploy consistently, right? And that gets back to standardizing on your distributions, right? Deployment templates, landing zones, those kinds of things that will really enable that structure to be applied to your, Kube environment, which I think, again, that hit a lot of the points that you made there, Joe. So, I guess they say a clock is right at least 2 times a day. So I feel like I need to quit while I'm ahead, between getting Elmo on the slide and being, kind of at least close to where my 2 experts are on the panel. It only goes downhill from here. So I should probably just, all right, Andy, it's all yours, man. I'm done for today. No, I can't. So let's dig a little bit deeper into it, right? So we talk about operationalizing, and we talk about kind of, that's not managing costs, it's managing your Kubernetes environment. So cut and paste did not help me on that one. But again, so what are your biggest challenges? So the folks that we asked, right, the people that we polled, security issues or concerns, 24%, right? So that's pretty straightforward and predictable, folks. It's complex environment, you just get scared about misconfigurations and those kind of things. So I think that makes sense, right? Next was interruptions from troubleshooting. So again, kind of, I just don't really know what the problem is. So identifying root cause and getting into that can be problematic. Cloud costs, that's one, and we've been chatting about that a little bit. And then delays in application deployment. So the infrastructure holding up, right, kind of progress on the development side is usually a bad place for I guess they're called platform engineers now. But for those folks, right, you don't want to, get in the way of, kind of progress from that standpoint. So quick reactions, guys. What do you see here? What makes sense? What's counterintuitive?
Yeah.
That would be an interesting place to start.
Well, my initial reaction is I think I know that there's actually this question's been asked in other types of research and other types of like surveys, and it's again very consistent, right? I think you're seeing security and cost really kind of come up as some of the two most important areas. And I think from our experience, these are sometimes afterthoughts. So you have organizations that might be building their cluster, they're shipping applications, right? Everything seems to be working, but the security risk of those applications may not be obvious on day one, right? And then there comes a point where you're sending lots of applications or to Kubernetes, and you need to make sure that what are the gaps, what are the best practices that need to be put in place, and this can quickly rise to the top. So I think the thing with security too in Kubernetes, and I'll have Andy knows this best. I'll let him jump in a second, but like some of it's context sensitive too. Like you have to be able to understand. Best practices are general, but there's also like how do you make sure that certain applications are secure and working in the way that they're supposed to. So it doesn't shock me that this is sort of the trend line, but a lot of the problems that we're hearing from customers, especially in 2023, is security and managing costs, especially in the container world.
Yeah, definitely. I just want to step back a second. The first thing that jumps out at me when I look at this is the difference in these responses from a year ago, because we've been asking these sorts of questions for multiple years now, and watching the shift from, I just don't even know what this Kubernetes thing is, or I don't know how to get a container running, or I need the basics. Like I need just the simple, how do I get going? The hello world of Kubernetes to, oh, now we have real problems. Like we have security problems, we have cost problems. Like these are day two problems that we're seeing come to the top now, which really says to me that, our prediction earlier of like over the next 12 months, we're just going to see this gradual exponential increase of adoption. I think that's a really good continuing indicator of that. And then, to Joe's point, security concerns, I'm not at all surprised to see that at the top, right? The defaults in Kubernetes, as we've already covered, very, very insecure, very wide open. It gives you all we like to call them foot guns, all the ways that you can shoot yourself in the foot right out of the box. So that's not surprising. And then, of course, cost is on everyone's mind now, right? The larger economic situation, everybody's coming back to cost really fast. So,
Yeah. So what does a security issue look like? Right. So, and again, security issues or concerns, both of those are kind of conflated, right? The concern part of it is, oh my God, we're actually doing real stuff on Kubernetes now. There must be a security issue, right? That's kind of what I think about in terms of concerns. Like, I don't know what it looks like, but it's scary and it's probably under my bed or in the closet. And I got to figure out how to deal with that. And, when I was 6, my mom, kind of wrapped a can of spray right guard and put monster spray on it, and that worked for me. I don't know if there's the analogy of monster spray, kind of that we could spray on Kubernetes to make that fear go away. But there are real issues, Andy, and I think you alluded to a number of them. Configuration is hard on a good day, right? Getting it up and running when you have all sorts of workloads going on up in there. You've got different applications. You've got developers, committing stuff. It's running through the pipeline. It's getting deployed. I mean, there's just a zillion opportunities to do the thing that could be wrong that opens up everything, right? So is that what it would look like, or are there kind of other security things that we really have to focus on to ensure that we've got integrity within that platform?
Yeah, I mean, configuration is a huge one. I think the hard part about it is we can point out all the configuration issues all day long. That's easy to do, right? You look at the YAML file and says this is wrong. The hard part is really reasoning about the overall, threat model that you're fixing with those configuration issues. And how do we look at that in a complex distributed environment like Kubernetes that's on top of a cloud provider as well? And so, learning how to reason about the whole system is tough. And it's a thing that we all kind of have to do in this new world of Kubernetes. This is actually kind of coming to me on the fly. I haven't really thought about this before, but really it would be nice to see some material out there, more material about just general threat modeling of your infrastructure in Kubernetes, because I don't feel like I've seen a lot of that.
Right.
And it seems like we're missing something there.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with Andy. I think one of the ways I've thought about it is there's definitely the configuration aspect, which, to Andy's point, there's a number of, you can flag a number of issues all day long. I think there's also the image side of it, making sure that you have a process in place to monitor and upgrade your images and to address known vulnerabilities. And then there's
That's
sort
a
of the
huge one.
yeah, and then there's sort of the runtime aspect, right? So like now, once the workload is running in Kubernetes, there's, do you have solutions that can help you detect and respond to anomalous activity? Do you have the different, the correct type of network controls in place? Is your RBAC secure? Which of your applications are running have become vulnerable since you last scanned it? These are the types of questions that come up, and again, there isn't sort of one. It's not like there's one area of Kubernetes where you have to just configure the security settings and you're all good to go. It's multiple layers that you have to be mindful of, and I think that's what makes it. The concepts are actually, very similar to other types of infrastructure systems, but the implementation of these security controls are just, different because Kubernetes is a different layer.
Beast. That's right. And I think just due to the general both immaturity and really newness of the platform, I mean, it does make it hard. Let's kind of dig into kind of the troubleshooting piece of it, because that was also another aspect there. So what does that look like, right? I mean, is that just an operational thing, meaning I don't know what the hell's going on with this platform, and there are so many different knobs, it takes me too long to figure out what's wrong, and then obviously things get interrupted on that. So that's a skills thing. Is it a tooling thing where we just need better tools to help us isolate kind of what those issues are faster? And again, it's an early technology, right? So we'll see things mature on all aspects of that. The security posture will get better from pre-configurations and tools and kind of guidance, Sandy, that you were referring to there. The operationalizing motions will get better too. But is that what folks are talking about? You think that they just don't know what's going on?
Oh yeah, I definitely think that's the case. There's so many times when a customer comes to us with a problem, or even one of our own engineers comes to me with a problem and says, "Hey, I got this error message. Like this thing's not working." And I go, "Oh, I saw this once 3 years ago in this one cluster," right? It's just that you get that from experience. And like you said, the tooling will get better. The ways that we surface that information and remove the need for that knowledge will get better as the technology matures. It's just not there yet. I mean, there's just so much complexity. It's going to take a while to get that going. And so until then, we're going to have to rely on, the experts within our companies and communities to do that. The good news is it's open source. And so the community is very large and there's a lot of people out there. Unfortunately, the complexity also matches that level of size. So you're kind of in trouble there.
Right. Kubernetes for dummies, right? Coming to a bookstore. Yeah, I'm sure they have that already. And I'm sure I'm going to get, sued by Wiley or whoever owns that brand now for actually just even saying that without doing a little TM on that front. So, I mean, I think, again, what I try to find are just the patterns that we're seeing here. And I think, that adoption curve, that general maturity, will happen. But as you were talking, Andy, another thought came up to me, for those folks who are like, I got this error message. Well, I just chat GTP or GPT it, right? And then you'll have your answer quickly. You don't have to mess around with Google or any of that and wade through that. So we're getting there. Not there yet, probably, but we're getting to the point where we can chat GPT stuff and streamline our operational processes. And who would have thunk, right? Who would have thunk?
Yeah. You laugh, but I've actually tried it a couple times, and I mean it's surprisingly good at even Kubernetes related things. So that may be the thing that helps us eliminate the need for as many experts. So
I'm going to say I welcome the overlords, the machine overlords from that standpoint, because, I teach a whole bunch of cloud security classes, and there are some folks in class that don't know anything about anything. And I spend an inordinate amount of time teaching them at least enough so they can get through the labs, while probably neglecting the folks that, kind of would like to push things forward. So if I could just chat GPT and just say, hey, that's a stupid question, ask chat GPT. Without telling them that's a stupid question, because that doesn't help my kind of instructor ratings on that. Black Hat and places like that care, but no, I'm excited about that. So next question: how much time do you spend auditing your Kubernetes environment per month? And 12% 1 day or less, 14% 2 to 3 days, 17% 4 to 5 days, 31% don't know, and 19% don't audit. Okay. So again, that's horrifying to me, right? I look at that and I'm just gonna, listen, you guys can have a different opinion, and I'd love to see your different opinion. That scares the crap out of me, right? Because again, we're starting to do real stuff in Kubernetes, and these folks aren't, kind of doing anything to, kind of have some third-party verification that their environment is kind of secure, that it's kind of running well, that it's not putting data at risk. So to me, this kind of scares the crap out of me. Is it scary to you guys, or it's like, oh, no, I knew that. That's not kind of, that's old hat for me. But more importantly, what do folks do, right? What do you do to kind of reduce what's clearly a significant amount of overhead to both understanding as well as keeping track of what's happening in your environment?
Yeah, well, I think it's not surprising that folks either aren't doing it or they don't know, and they likely aren't doing it even under the don't knows, because it is this notion of folks are going fast, they're getting applications out there, and they kind of don't know or what to anticipate as problems down the road, right? Or the question around, hey, have we, how do we optimize costs for our Kubernetes environment because we're spending too much, right? Like, they haven't had to address those questions just yet. So we're starting to see that cycle. And I think what we're finding, like, the thing that actually jumps out to me is the 4 to 5 days, 17%, which is the organizations that might actually be auditing. A lot of them are spending a considerable amount of time. And I think what we're seeing is organizations need to move to select tools that are going to focus more on automating this and making sure that there's feedback loops back to the individual teams that are deploying, right? No longer can the DevOps team kind of solve all problems. I think you have to create this shared framework between dev, security, and operations to bring that visibility and drive kind of ownership of the different types of findings, right? And so there's a lot more automation that I think can be added to the auditing, the policy auditing, or the best practice auditing type space, and that's sort of where we're seeing customers ask us to go even faster.
Right.
Yeah, definitely. I ask the question when I see this in my head. I go, how many in the don't know column are developers that are in an environment where they're effectively continuously auditing because it's built into their automation? It's in their CI/CD process. It's in their, they have feedback loops that are doing the, I call it continuous auditing or whatever you want to call it for them. And so they don't realize they're doing it. They're just doing their jobs. And I think that's what we have to head towards is, that continuous automation, because, the days of, I run a Nessus scan once a month and go fix all the CVEs. There's just too much. Like, there's way too many things to fix, and we can't keep doing that. It's not going to work.
Yeah. I mean, not only do you just kind of really aggregate or assemble too many things to fix within a certain, window, with the attacks today and even just a misconfiguration. I mean, if you're waiting a patch window of a month, you're dead, right? I mean, things happen so quickly now. Things can just crater. And again, it could be an operational thing. It could be a security. It's not just, kind of security that'll kill you on that front. But I do want to, kind of dig in a little bit because Joe, I think you said we need better alignment between, dev, sec, and ops. Right. And it's funny. I read the Phoenix Project like everybody else did, 7 years ago, 8 years ago. And it was kumbaya and dev and ops and, they have coffee together and that, and it's compelling. And then security. Yeah, they're kind of assholes when you first get to know them, but they're okay. Right. When you kind of really, dig in, and then they can play nice, everybody. And again, we have nice campfires and the all hands meetings are fun because everybody gets along. And then you talk to somebody in the real world, right? And they're like, yeah, we still don't like each other. Dev does their thing.
Yeah.
Ops does their thing. Well, yeah, we have a pipeline, but the ops people are doing stuff that I can't stand if they're dev. The dev folks are doing things to mess up my ops environment. The security folks have all these friggin' tools they want to integrate into the pipeline, and they're bitching because we can't break the builds. And that's the world I see, right? I mean, is it different? Are you guys seeing a different world where everybody does get along and we can sing Kumbaya by the fire, or do we still have some cultural evolution to get to?
I mean, I think there's definitely still cultural evolution in place, right? I mean, there's I would say there's this desire for organizations to embrace kind of what we call service ownership. So like, the ultimate goal, which I don't think many organizations aren't here today, right? It is a journey, is that, the teams that, build the application also own shipping and running that application as well. Now, I think that is an ideal, and it's not the reality today, but there's, various cultural things that are happening to help kind of move in that direction. And part of it is making sure that, the folks who are closest to being able to affect change, to be able to secure their application or update the container to a newer version, et cetera, get the information in the tools that they use at the right time, right? And so whether that's in some organizations, maybe it's like a tech lead or on a development team, or in other organizations, it's a DevOps engineer, a platform engineer, right? It's about getting the data into the tools that they use at the right time. And I think that's really where you meet customers in the middle, right? Like, how do you meet, organizations where they are so that they can embrace automation, go fast, and also, fit it to these different kind of cultural paradigms. Be curious what Andy sees, though, given you've got, so much more ops background than I do.
I mean, it's wild across the spectrum, right? We have, just within our customer base, we have a services arm where we deliver, Kubernetes clusters to customers. And, even across that list of clients, it's wildly varying what you see, and the ultimate dream of DevOps that we got, 8 years ago or whatever it was, from the Phoenix project, and it's being realized in some places, and in a lot of places it's not. And it's going to continue to be that journey. I think we'll just continue to see it oscillate a little bit. I think we've gotten pretty ops heavy with Kubernetes, and now we're going to see this year, we've already started seeing, you mentioned, platform engineering, and then other people are calling it developer experience. We're going to shift more back towards like, how do we, serve our customer, which is the developer, better. And it'll just continue to flip back and forth between those until,
That's right.
Until the singularity happens and we all serve our robot overlords, as you mentioned earlier.
Is this the part where I say, when you guys have gray hair in your beard like me, you'll have seen the pendulum go back and forth, a dozen times. So that tends to be the standard, thing there. You stick around long enough, you see everything 10 times. So this one is, and Joe, you alluded to automation like 5 times, right? And
yep.
If anybody was kind of checking their little list on their bingo card, right? Joe wins the automation kind of contest there, and I happen to believe it, right? So do you have automation in your DevOps workflow to implement Kubernetes security guardrails? Again, 42% say yes. 39 or 34% say no, like 23% say they don't know. I'm kind of surprised. To me, this was a little higher than I had expected, right? Because I've been trying to get security guardrails done on just cloud infrastructure for about 100 years, and not really 100 years, but
right. This does seem a little high to me, and I think there's probably a portion of the don't knows are actually knows, because typically with guardrails you are getting that feedback loop, right? So it should happen in the tools that you're using. It should happen at time of pull request or deploy time. So but even still, it does seem a little high. I think what we're what I think when we talk about guardrails, it is actually kind of an open-ended term, right? Like, what do we actually mean by guardrails? And the reality is, at a implementation phase, it could mean feedback right at the time of pull request on your infrastructure as code. So in Kubernetes, that could be your Helm file or YAML or even Terraform files, right? It could also mean, getting feedback at the time of your deployment. So using something like an admission controller to either deny or pass a workload into the cluster. And usually this feedback is around something around configuration. So, did you accidentally introduce container running as root or privilege escalation? Is this a namespace in the cluster that needs to follow very strict security practices or strict pod security practices? And so that's usually where you're going to get the feedback. I think a great starting point for organizations isn't necessarily putting policies in place and then starting to deny a bunch of workloads, because then you have this friction with developers who may not know exactly how to fix things, right? It's, I think, first just being able to put the alarm bells in place that allow things to move forward, but create the awareness in the tools, and maybe even create tickets for prioritization in the backlog. And I think that's usually the best place to start, and before you start enforcing some of these guardrails as well.
Yeah, definitely. I look at this and I get excited because I think back to 4 years ago when we were running Kubernetes clusters for customers, and we realized that our clusters were great. Like, we were ahead of the curve in being able to run a stable cluster, but our customers kept breaking them because they kept deploying stuff that was broken. And so we said, we've got to put some guardrail. We didn't use this term at the time, but we've got to put some guardrails in place. And so, we were like, we should build a validating admission webhook controller that lets us enforce these things. And at the time, like, there was nothing out there. We couldn't go install a tool to do it. And the tools out there are just, there's so many more now, and there's such a vast array of them that it makes me happy that 42% said yes here, because 4 years ago, that was a zero. Because the tools just didn't exist. And so I'm happy about it.
So organizationally, how do you get this done, right? Because I know there's always been a whole, kind of issue of who is empowered to, set up these guardrails. We talk about security here, but, obviously you can have operational guardrails and all sorts of things to enforce the policies.
So we actually just wrote up a document on this to help organizations move faster with implementation of guardrails. And really what we see is this is where platform engineering can really help with, facilitating that implementation. So, platform engineering is this new emerging discipline. They have to work with security teams and get feedback from security and be partners with security to make sure that, not only does security have visibility into Kubernetes, but that, the controls that security needs are also being implemented. And at the same time, the end customer of platform engineering is application teams who are, again, their job is to write code, get it shipped out. And so they can act as this facilitator between, what are the security requirements that are appropriate for our organization or for certain apps, and how can I make sure that the teams who, are shipping their applications and may need to fix the underlying config or make sure they're updating their images to use newer versions are getting that feedback. And I think it does start with the platform engineering team. We do recommend kind of starting out by implementing tooling at the admission control and in sort of a shift left context. So like at the time of a pull request in the CI pipeline, and really just starting by giving the feedback. Like, don't necessarily break the pipeline or slow down teams, but start giving the feedback in a very rapid way so that they're aware of some of these issues. And then that helps create a learning opportunity later to reinforce what those best practices are.
Yeah. And, coupled with that, a lot of it comes back to just, education and communication. Kubernetes is hard. It's complex. We all know this. How can we help our developers at least understand enough of what's going on for them to not, to care, right? And that's something that I've always believed in, is that, like, creating just a pure abstraction layer between Kubernetes and the developer, that can work, but it's a huge undertaking. And usually your platform team is understaffed, it's small. So instead of that, can we educate them and, help, share information about how the system works? And we've been successful with that with our clients, and saying, like, okay, this broke the thing because this is how Kubernetes works. Now, this is how you do it right going forward. And if we can automate some of that, but also, just communicate well, I think that goes a long way as well.
So let me just make some stuff up now, right? And this literally, I'm making this up. So if this is a terrible idea, just go, Mike, that's a terrible idea. And so let's move on to the next thing. So one of the things, and we've had this problem in security for a long, long time, right? Because developers didn't want to know about it. They shouldn't have to know about it. They were expected to know about it. It didn't end well. So what a couple of enterprising folks did is they decided they were going to build a champions program, right? They were called security champions. So they would basically take a developer, train them up on security stuff, not all the developers, right? One developer per team or whatever it is. And they would kind of be the representation of security perspective. They would help the other developers. They would, answer questions. They'd get a dog yummy in a t-shirt and a black hoodie, right? Because every developer wants to feel like they're in security. So they get a black hoodie and they're part of the team. Would that kind of thing work for platform engineering? I mean, I'm literally making this up. It just seemed like a pretty obvious analogy to me. I just hadn't heard of anybody kind of thinking along those lines.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that could work. I mean, again, I keep going back to my experience with our customers, because that's what I know best, is that's how we operate best, is when we have sort of an operations engineer in the customer environment that is, sort of our champion. We run the Kubernetes infrastructure. We've set it up this way. We teach them how it works, and then they work with their team to get it working. And on a larger scale, I definitely think that could work. Where you run into problems is like you have a 2-person platform team. They're spending all their time building the platform. They don't have time to teach these champions about the infrastructure. And so, that's always going to be a problem, but you have to think hard about that.
Well, I've seen security champion programs as well from in the application security world. And, I think it can start with operations and security working together, like, operations helping security understand, how certain things work in Kube and vice versa, right? I think there's that opportunity to collaborate. And then I've also seen just security teams who, develop champions. They focus on a number of different things, like developers. At the end of the day, developers, don't need to worry just about Kubernetes issues, right? They need to worry about application security code issues. They need to worry about a lot of things. It's a very challenging job. And so I think, Kubernetes and cloud native technologies can become an extension of these existing security champion programs, where they are talking about best practices for writing good secure code, but also best practices for, maintaining your images, making sure that you have proper infrastructure as code configuration, et cetera.
Yep. That's what all of you audience out there, that's what happens sometimes on a Techstrong webinar. We just make some stuff up and it may actually work and have value every so often. So let's kind of keep along these lines of kind of automation and what can we do better, faster, cheaper, and the like. We also asked, what Kubernetes management activities require too much manual effort or time, which is really a way of asking, what is it that you want to automate?
Yeah.
Tracking down costs and overruns. We talked about that complexity, configuration complexity. So Andy, you certainly hit on that one. Checking and remediating vulnerabilities, right? Kind of staying in compliance and then gathering, reporting compliance evidence were the potpourri of things that we asked. What strikes you about this chart, besides the fact that they're all within 3 or 4?
Yeah, I mean, I think what strikes me is that they're all, there's a lot of things that have require too much manual effort or time, right? And there's increasingly more and more automation around these items. The other thing that strikes me is, I think in a previous slide, we talked about security resonating as one of the top issues. Well, like a number of the, almost more than half of these are all security issues, right? So, it kind of shows you how the problem of security in cloud native is a multi-layered problem. It's not just one area of Kube that you need to really, understand. So, that's what jumps out at me. I'm curious what you see, Andy.
No, I mean, same. I'm surprised they're all so close to each other. I would expect to see some of them be higher. It is interesting. Cost seems to be making a slightly larger contribution here than in some of the previous questions, because that is one that even, especially until even recently, the ability to get visibility into cost is hard. But that one's closely tied to configuration complexity, because the way you control cost is by setting resource requests and limits appropriately. Like that's the first knob you can turn, and that's complex for a lot of people. And that, it's sort of a new thing that developers have to be aware of when writing their deployment code. So those are closely tied to each other.
I'd also say,
how do we do that, right? So that's kind of the question, so that's great. And again, clearly, kind of configuration complexity, again, we've been talking about that, just beating that, kind of mercilessly, because it's that important, right? How do you start to get leverage out of this environment? How do you get consistency, right? Given, again, the underlying complexity of the environment. So is it a matter that I need a tool, I need an environment, I need a better pipeline? So if I'm kind of starting today and I'm kind of nowhere, what are the first couple things I do to really, address that configuration complexity issue?
I think, you need, a platform that provides a lot of things out of the box. So like one of the things that we've done since day one is you get ingress controller, external DNS, and cert manager out of the box. So you've got your TLS, your DNS, and your ingress handled out of the box. You have to deploy one file. Here's how you do it. We provide a blueprint for how to do that to, the customer. And we say, deploy your applications like this. And that gives them, they see the value in it because they go, oh, if I do it the way Fairwinds says, now I get all this stuff out of the box. I don't have to worry about it. And then on top of that, you have your, guardrails in place, not allowing them to deploy things differently, and sort of forcing them into that box. I think those are the two ways that you just kind of have to remove the complexity. You have to take some of it away, and not allow it to be utilized.
Is there a downside to that, right? Because obviously if you remove the complexity, you also remove some of the flexibility that a tool like Kubernetes has. How do you find the sweet spot? And there may not be an answer, Andy. I mean, I'm just poking at you a little bit here, but
yeah.
Those are obviously the trade-offs that we have to think about.
For sure. And it's always the difficult trade-off. And I think, we have to realize that Kubernetes offers flexibility here, like all the way out to the edges. And we can bring that in and still maintain some flexibility. And then it's a matter of, making sure we understand the requirements of the people deploying into the cluster, right? And they say, we need X, Y, and Z, and we provide the flexibility to do that. So it's definitely a trade-off, and there's always going to be, a little back and forth there. But I think there's so much of it, you have to remove some of the complexity. Otherwise, it's just impossible.
Yeah.
Yep.
So checking and remediating vulnerabilities, Joe, right? Is that just a matter of, again, having something that's looking over your environment and checking the repos and making sure that, kind of you're updating on a certain thing, or is there a different kind of automation that folks should be thinking about?
No, I think I think this is an area that you're increasingly seeing a lot more automation around. So, a lot of I think the first thing that may resonate here is just kind of managing your container images and making sure that you're securing them. And I think one of the unique things about Kubernetes, though, is there's a lot of third-party images or lots of third-party add-ons that you're using to run the cluster. And so, a lot of folks think about container images as like, the container image that they build for their application, right? Which, they have full control over upgrading the different layers of that image. A lot of the challenges in Kubernetes is just there's lots of third-party images that you need to run stuff. And the additional kind of administration overhead here is making sure that you can monitor for newer versions that are available that are less vulnerable, and being able to have very quick and precise upgrade recommendations. So, an area that we've been helping our customers with is being able to show, hey, you're running this third-party piece of software in your cluster. It serves an important job for maybe, DNS or something, right? Or ingress controls. There's a newer version available. It's less vulnerable. We recommend you upgrade to this version and provide automation around helping customers do that. That's increasingly the thing that I think can help, remove some of that ongoing toil for administrators.
Yeah, that's one of those things where I guess part of the security skeptic, comes out when I hear you say that stuff, Joe, and I go, we kind of suck at patching, right? Just operationally, we just suck at kind of operating and just that whole motion. And now we've got all these different moving parts and components and all that. And at least with, when stuff is in a pipeline, right? We kind of know the components, we can kind of get an alert, and we still suck at, keeping that stuff up to date. So again, I'm hopeful that automation, kind of like ChatGPT, will shut up those, clients or students that don't know what the hell they're doing and consuming all the class things. I'm hoping that automation can do a similar type of thing for this operational motion, because again, if you've got vulnerable stuff, I mean, we all know, kind of Patch Tuesday is Exploit Wednesday. So once these things are known and out there, and can be weaponized, it is. So, we do have to kind of really tighten up our operational chops in order to, keep this kind of an environment up there. Yep. So, that's the hope, right? But, I've also done this long enough to know that hope is not a strategy. So, probably shouldn't be specifically relying on that. All right, let's kind of dig into costs a little bit. That was one of the, 19% said, that's something that, we spend too much time, thinking about. So we did kind of end the poll by asking folks, as your Kubernetes environment grows, are your costs staying within the planned budget, right? That's 26%. Increasing beyond the planned budget, 18%. Out of control, right? 9%, almost 10%. Coming in lower than the planned budget, 5%. So that's kind of like when you give the kids the credit card and, there's it does happen that they spend less money than you think, but it doesn't happen very often. Right. And then, don't know, but wish I did is 34%. So, again, yes, predictable, not predictable, but then really kind of let's get down to what folks can do to provide better visibility. And again, whether it's automating or some other mechanism to help them get better handle on their costs of their Kubernetes environment.
I want to know how many of the don't know, but wish I did. It's they don't know the costs or they don't know their budget, because a lot of small companies, like the cloud line item it's such an insignificant portion of the overall budget that maybe there isn't a budget. So, that's the first thing that pops into my head when I look at this.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, and I would say I had the same kind of impression from Andy. I was like, it's the don't know that they don't know their container costs, and the reality is, so a lot of organizations today are running containers and Kubernetes, but they don't have the tooling in place to understand the accurate cost allocation of container spend, right? And so Kubernetes can kind of obfuscate that to some extent, and that's where there's becoming an increasing need for tooling around understanding container and Kubernetes costs. So I'm assuming that's part of the 34%. It's interesting that a lot of folks are still staying within the planned budget. I wonder, and as we enter into 2023 and with the macro economy, if that planned budget shrinks over time and there's more pressure to save money, right? Our research has indicated that lots of teams over provision their applications on Kubernetes because they don't know what to set for memory or CPU, so they just set very high values and they ship their app and they never revisit it. And so most of the time there's scenarios where there's too much compute being used or reserved and you're not actually using all that reservation. So that's an area that I think is a quick win for many organizations.
Yeah, definitely. And doing that, with that automation that we've been talking about, with those feedback loops and providing that information back to, the people setting those requests and limits, like, hey, you set it here, you've only been using this much, you can turn it down and safely, right? And being able to do that recommended in a way that doesn't break it when they do it, because then as soon as you've lost that trust the first time, they're never going to change it again.
That's right.
So
trust is a hard thing to do. All right, we got a question. Oh my God, a question. We got a question. So, can implementing platform engineering help beyond DevOps and DevSecOps, right, in regard to scaling Kubernetes in an organization? So, again, platform engineering, this is a great one to kind of wrap up on, because it is one of these, kind of initiatives that most folks don't quite understand what it is and why it's important and how it can help. So I think that would be great to, kind of wrap some stuff up with, and then we'll have some parting shots. And obviously if anybody else has any other questions, kind of fire away. But you guys go, what help these folks understand about platform engineering.
Yeah, I think my view on it is it's definitely kind of an evolution of maybe DevOps, right? And it's really been focused, I think, at the highest level. It's helping the different teams in your organization ship their applications to Kubernetes or cloud native fast and secure. And in order to do that, platform engineering teams need to build the tooling or self-service capabilities to enable that to happen, right? So a lot of times they're in the business of building strong, an infrastructure foundation, the tools and the capabilities, so that other teams can use that and be self-sufficient. I think that's sort of my view on platform engineering. I'd be curious, Andy, how you've seen it rolled out.
Yeah, the fact is it hasn't been rolled out in a lot of places, right? Yeah. It's this concept that people are coming back to because we've all realized that Kubernetes is the ultimate foundation for building a platform. And I think really what it is it's, to what Joe said very similarly, is that it's the culmination of all of these things we've been talking about. It's the combination of, rock solid infrastructure with the Kubernetes cluster, with all the tooling in that cluster to provide capabilities to developers to deploy their applications, along with the guardrails, the feedback loops, and the monitoring and observability, which we didn't really get into much today. But all of those things wrapped up together, delivered by a team that I think in the best cases works like a product team. Their product is the platform. They deliver that to their customer, who is the developer. And if you think about it that way, you can really end up with a much better platform and product, because you're implementing, all the things that we're good at when delivering software to our customers. When we're delivering software, we just haven't done it as much in infrastructure.
That's right. I kind of liken it to, this concept of design patterns, right? So that what we're doing is we've got a set of design patterns that our developers can use to get them 90% of the way there, so they don't have to make this stuff up when they're doing it. They don't have to reinvent the wheel. They basically get code that they can just pop in that allows them to build it. They have to customize it. Of course they customize it, right? But they have something that starts there, and 80% of that provides that consistency and really that reliability that we want as we continue to scale this thing up. So that was great. Appreciate it, guys. Any parting thoughts about this before we kind of start to wrap up and get Cody involved to give away the gift cards? Because I know that's why most of these folks stay anyway.
I don't know. I think this has been a very interesting sort of research and kind of shows the need for, well, it just shows kind of how Kubernetes is kind of growing, and that there's a need to kind of build more and more automation to ensure teams are deploying consistently with best practices. And I think there's still a lot of room and opportunity for that automation in the space, but it was exciting to kind of get a pulse check here and see where things are. What about you, Andy?
Yeah, nothing major takeaways, but great conversation. And I'm really excited to just see the continued evolution of this. I mean, this platform engineering concept, all of a sudden this month of January, everybody's looking forward to the year. They're like, oh, this is huge. So it's going to be the buzzword for the year, I think. And I'm excited to see what that means. Like buzzwords are fun to laugh at, but they also, come out of reality. So I'm curious to see what new tools we get out of that.
Yeah, I would agree. And as I continue to ramp up in cloud native and Kubernetes and, kind of start figuring out where the bathroom is, kind of important stuff like that. It is going to be interesting to not look at it. And again, we kind of called our trend piece the long march, and that is actually in your handouts area. So if you want to check out our cloud native trends for 2023, it's both with the pulse meter and the trend piece, but we call it the long march because we do think it's going to be years, right? Not months, as we kind of ramp up towards this, cloud native infrastructure centric world. We've got a lot to learn. We've got a lot of tooling that needs to be established to make this consistent and secure and reliable and resilient and all of that stuff. We've got a lot of learning to do to really get a sense of how all this fits into our modern development environment. So there's just, again, it's a very exciting time if you're that kind of person that likes to see stuff that's hardly even in the boat and it doesn't work too well, and you have an opportunity to really influence it, right, and move it forward. So to Andy's point, if you are excited about some of these things, get involved in the projects, right? There's always kind of stuff that you can do with the projects that helps everybody, that helps the environment, and again, keep pace with what's going on. So you can get the pulse meter, and we will send you an email with the recording in case you want to tell all your friends about our witty and fun banter that we had on this one. Just to let you know, we've got the Techstrong Con coming up, and that's really digital transformation focused. So we'll really talk about kind of how digital transformation drives a lot of the things that we're seeing in terms of cloud native infrastructure, in terms of security as well as DevOps on that front. And with that, I will hand it back to Cody. You've got some work to do to wrap things up. Yeah.
I sure do, Mike. Here's the figurative hook pulling you off the stage. All right, Andy, Joe, Mike, thank you all so much for being here. I'd like to remind our audience that this session was recorded. So should you want to rewatch or share with a friend, you will be receiving an email with a link to access this recording on demand. Or, of course, you can find it living on the Container Journal website at containerjournal.com/webinars. So as Mike mentioned, we do still have those 4 $25 Amazon gift cards to give out. And our winners are Amor J, Raju B, Karima S, and Sidesh K. So to our 4 winners, please keep an eye on your inbox to claim your gift card. But if you don't happen to see that email, please do check your spam folder. I'd like to thank Fairwinds for sponsoring our program today. And I'd like to give a shout out to Techstrong research team for putting together our pulse meter for today. And to everyone who has spent the last hour with us, thank you so much for doing so. We really appreciate your time, and we really also appreciate your feedback. As soon as we close out, there will be a survey that will pop up on your screen. We'd really like to hear from you. Let us know what you thought about our program, or maybe what you'd like to see on an upcoming one. Otherwise, we do hope to see everyone at an upcoming Techstrong learning experience. Have a great rest of your day. And Andy, Joe, and Mike, thank you all once more.
Thanks again.
Thank you.